The sky above Earth had turned a sickly orange as the Tylorian ships blotted out the sun, their dark silhouettes casting shadows over the once peaceful planet. Humanity had never known a true enemy like the Tylorians. Their conquests, spanning galaxies, had left entire worlds desolate. And now Earth was next for the taking. The first wave of Tylorian ships arrived without warning, tearing through Earth's defenses as if they were paper. The human fleets scrambled to retaliate, but the alien invaders were relentless. Their advanced technology, overwhelming humanity's last line of defense cities, fell one by one as the war raged on. The Tylorians showed no mercy. They were masters of war, cold and calculating, with no interest in diplomacy, only in domination. Captain Ilara Voss stood on the bridge of the Aegis, watching the destruction unfold. Her dark eyes narrowed with focus, her face set in a grim expression. She had seen the horrors of war before, but nothing compared to what she was witnessing now. The Earth she swore to protect was being torn apart, and her people were losing the fight. The news of each fallen city came like a hammer blow to her heart, but she couldn't afford to let emotions cloud her judgment. She had a job to do, and that job was humanity's last hope. Ilara's mind raced as she searched for any way to turn the tide of the battle. Then came the message, a cryptic transmission from an unknown source. It was brief, but clear enough to catch her attention. "The Cradle is humanity's last chance. Find it before they do." The message ended just as suddenly as it had come, leaving Ilara to wonder what it meant. She had heard whispers of the Cradle before, a mythical artifact spoken of in hushed tones by old historians, a power buried beneath the surface of Earth, said to be capable of saving humanity or destroying it entirely, but no one truly knew what the Cradle was or where to find it. She knew that the Cradle was not just a weapon, it was something more, something ancient, something humanity had forgotten for centuries, but now it seemed to be their only hope. Ilara turned to her crew with determination in her eyes. "Prepare a team. We're going to find the Cradle, and we're going to unlock its power." She didn't need to say more. The crew knew the stakes. The Cradle was humanity's last hope, and Ilara was willing to risk everything to find it. The plan was simple but dangerous. Ilara would lead a team deep into the heart of Earth, where the Cradle was said to be hidden beneath layers of forgotten ruins and long-forgotten technologies. She would have to navigate the dangers of the planet's core and uncover the secrets of the ancient guardians that protected it. Along the way, that the Tylorians were closing in, and their relentless assault on Earth meant they would stop at nothing to find the Cradle first. If the aliens got to it first, humanity would have no chance of survival. As the Aegis prepared to leave orbit, Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this mission could be their last chance at survival, but she also knew there was no turning back now. Humanity's future rested on her shoulders, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. Ilara stood before her team in the war room, her eyes scanning the faces of the soldiers and scientists she had handpicked for this mission. They were her best, the ones who had survived the bloodiest battles, the ones who had never hesitated to fight for humanity's survival. Now they were about to embark on the most dangerous mission of their lives, the stakes higher than they could ever imagine. "We don't know what we're walking into," Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "The Cradle could be nothing more than a myth, or it could be the key to saving Earth. Either way, we can't afford to fail." Her words hung in the air, the gravity of the situation settling on everyone's shoulders. The team stood in silence for a moment, each of them contemplating the task ahead. Then Dr. Jonas Whitmore, a brilliant scientist and expert in ancient technology, stepped forward. "I've been studying the Cradle for years," he said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. "There are records in old texts and fragments from early human history that suggest it was built by an ancient civilization long before our time. They called themselves the Architects." He paused, his eyes distant, as he recalled the old stories. "They created the Cradle as a weapon, a tool for humanity's survival, but something went wrong, and they abandoned it. We don't fully understand what happened to them, but we know this: if the Tylorians find it first, they will use it to wipe us out." Ilara nodded. She knew the danger all too well. The Tylorians were not the type to hesitate when it came to wiping out a species that stood in their way. They had destroyed entire civilizations without remorse. So we need to find it before they do. And we need to be ready for anything, she said. Captain Ilara's team was made up of a diverse group of experts including specialists in combat engineering, archaeology, and even cryptography. They were prepared for the worst, but none of them knew just how dangerous the journey would become. The Xylorians were already advancing across Earth's surface, and it wouldn't be long before they discovered the team's mission. The Aegis slipped past Earth's atmosphere undetected, making its way toward a remote location deep in the Arctic, where old maps suggested the Cradle might be hidden beneath the ice. The journey would be long and fraught with peril. The weather alone would make the trip nearly impossible, but Ilara had no choice. The world above was falling apart, and they needed the Cradle's power to turn the tide. Days turned into weeks as the team made their way through treacherous terrain. The Arctic wasteland was harsh and unforgiving, with blizzards that seemed to have no end. The cold was so intense it numbed their fingers and toes. Their every step was a battle against the elements, but they pressed on, driven by the hope that the Cradle would hold the key to humanity's salvation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the team arrived at a massive underground complex hidden beneath the ice. Their equipment hummed with anticipation as they began their descent into the dark depths of the Earth. They had no idea what awaited them below, but they knew that Xylorians were closing in. Time was running out, and every step brought them closer to the Cradle's power. The air inside the underground complex was thick with the smell of rust and old machinery. The walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the very structure had a life of its own. Ilara felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't let it show. Her team moved with purpose, scanning every corner and every doorway. As they ventured deeper into the complex, the path ahead was uncharted, and every step could be their last. Dr. Whitmore led the way, his eyes glued to the ancient maps and texts he had studied for years. The symbols on the walls were foreign and intricate, but they seemed to be pointing them in the right direction. He muttered to himself as he deciphered the markings, his voice barely audible above the hum of the machines. "We're close," he said, his excitement barely contained. "The Cradle is within reach." Ilara's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. They had been searching for so long, and now it seemed the end was in sight. But as they continued to descend, the atmosphere began to shift. Something was wrong. The air grew heavier, and the deeper they went, the more oppressive the feeling became. It was as if the very walls were closing in on them. Then they heard a low rumble that seemed to come from all directions. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a deep mechanical hum echoed through the corridors. Ilara motioned for her team to stop. "Stay alert," she ordered, her voice steady but tense. Suddenly, the walls around them shifted, and a massive door slowly creaked open. A dark figure appeared in the doorway, its silhouette barely visible in the dim light. Ilara raised her weapon instinctively, but Dr. Whitmore stepped forward. "Wait," he said, his voice filled with awe. "This is it," he breathed, "the Cradle." What they saw before them was nothing short of astonishing. It was a vast chamber filled with towering machines that hummed with power. At the center of the room was a massive spherical object, its surface covered in glowing symbols and patterns. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, and Ilara could feel its presence in her bones. She had never seen anything like it before. The Cradle was real, and it was more than they had ever imagined. But before they could approach, a voice boomed through the chamber, a deep metallic tone that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. "You should not be here." The voice said, the sound of it sending chills down their spines. Ilara's team froze, their hands tightening on their weapons as they searched for the source of the voice, but there was no one in sight. The voice spoke again, this time with more authority. "Leave now or face the consequences." The tone was cold and unforgiving. Ilara's heart raced. She knew this wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. The Cradle was not a simple relic. It was something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Dr. Whitmore took a step forward, his face pale but resolute. "We don't have time for games," he said, his voice trembling. "The Xylorians are coming. They will destroy us all if we don't use the Cradle's power." For a moment there was silence, then the voice spoke once more. "The Cradle's power is not for the weak of heart. If you are not prepared to face what comes next, you will be consumed by it." Ilara's eyes narrowed. She wasn't about to turn back now. They had come this far, and there was no going back. The fate of humanity rested on what happened next. "We're ready," she said, her voice unwavering. "Show us what we need to do." The room seemed to grow darker as the voice echoed through the chamber, its presence pressing in from every direction. Ilara stood her ground, her team tense, but resolute. The air was thick with anticipation as they waited for the next move. The cradle pulsed softly in the center of the room, its glow shifting from blue to red as if it were alive and aware of their every movement. Dr. Whitmore stood beside Ilara, his hands shaking, but his eyes fixed on the cradle with an almost obsessive focus. "This is it," he whispered. "This is the source of humanity's salvation or its doom." His words hung heavy in the air, the weight of them settling over the group. Ilara turned to him, her voice calm but firm. "Then we make sure we use it the right way," she said. Before anyone could respond, the voice spoke again, its tone now filled with a sense of finality. "To unlock the power of the cradle, you must first face what lies within it. Only those who are willing to confront their deepest fears will survive the awakening." The voice warned. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the cradle began to hum louder, its surface rippling as if responding to the challenge. Ilara's heart raced. She knew this was no simple task. Whatever lay inside the cradle was unknown, and it would test them all in ways they could not anticipate. But they had no choice. They had to face whatever came next. Without another word, Ilara stepped forward, the rest of the team following her. As they approached the cradle, its energy pulsing stronger with each step they took, as if it were drawing them in. Ilara reached out her hand and touched the surface of the cradle. The moment her fingers made contact, the world around her seemed to shift. The room blurred, and the sound of the humming machines faded into an eerie silence. Suddenly she was no longer standing in the chamber. Instead, she found herself in a vast, barren landscape. The sky above was blood-red, and the ground beneath her feet was cracked and desolate. She looked around but saw no sign of her team or the cradle, just a vast emptiness stretching out in every direction. Then she heard a voice. It was her own voice, but twisted and distorted, filled with anger and regret. "You are weak, Ilara," the voice said. "You always have been." Ilara's heart clenched. She turned around, but there was no one there, just the voice echoing through her mind. "What is this?" she whispered. The voice laughed bitterly. "This is your greatest fear, the truth you have buried deep within yourself." It said, "You have always been afraid of failure, afraid of losing everything you hold dear, but you are not strong enough to overcome it." Ilara clenched her fists, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She refused to listen to the voice. She had faced death countless times, but never like this, never with the weight of her own doubts and insecurities threatening to consume her. She wasn't going to let it win. "I will not fail," she said through gritted teeth. "I will not let humanity fall." The world around her seemed to respond to her words. The sky darkened even further, and the ground cracked open beneath her feet. But Ilara stood tall. She was not going to give in. She took a deep breath and looked toward the horizon, where the dark silhouette of a massive city loomed in the distance. It was a vision of Earth, a vision of everything. She had fought for everything. She had sacrificed. The city was burning. The streets were littered with the bodies of her people, and she knew it was her fault. The voice whispered once more, "You failed them all, Ilara." But Ilara didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Instead, she focused on the fire in her chest, the fire that had kept her fighting for so long. She was ready to confront her fears and face whatever came next. Ilara stood frozen in the midst of the burning city, her mind a storm of emotions. The world around her continued to unravel, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't let it consume her. She had seen loss before, but this was different. This was a vision of her greatest fear, the vision of humanity's destruction at her hands, and it felt real. The flames licked the sky, and the stench of death hung heavy in the air. She looked down at her hands and saw them stained with blood, but there was no time for hesitation. She couldn't allow herself to be defeated now. The voice continued to whisper its venomous words, taunting her. "You failed them, Ilara. You were supposed to protect them, but instead you led them to their doom." The voice echoed through the charred ruins of the city, each word like a knife in her chest. But Ilara shook her head. She would not let this fear define her. She had to face it head-on. She had to rise above the doubt, the guilt, the pain, and show herself that she was stronger than this vision of failure. With a deep breath, she turned away from the burning city and began to walk through the wasteland, her steps heavy, but steady. She couldn't let the past haunt her. She had made mistakes, but she had also made choices that mattered, and she had no intention of letting those choices fade into dust. As she walked, the landscape began to shift. The sky above her dimmed, and the ground cracked open, revealing the remnants of a long-lost civilization, ancient structures that seemed to pulse with forgotten power. Elara's mind raced as she realized where she was. This wasn't just a vision. This was a part of the Cradle's test. It was forcing her to confront not only her own fears, but the weight of humanity's history and the legacy of those who had come before her. The architecture around her seemed familiar yet alien, a fusion of organic and mechanical designs that spoke of a time long past. She could feel the energy in the air like an electrical current running through her veins. It was as if the Cradle was alive and aware of her presence. "Do you understand now?" The voice asked, its tone softer but no less insidious. "This is what you carry with you every day, the burden of humanity's past and the mistakes that have led to this moment." Elara clenched her fists, the weight of the past pressing down on her shoulders, but she refused to be crushed by it. She wasn't going to let the mistakes of others dictate her future. "I don't carry their mistakes," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I carry their hope, their dreams, their strength, and I will not let their sacrifices be in vain." The ground trembled beneath her feet as the Cradle responded to her words. The energy in the air intensified, and the ruins around her seemed to come alive. The ancient machines hummed with power, as if awakening from a long slumber, and Elara knew that she was finally passing the test. The Cradle was offering her a chance to redeem herself and humanity. The landscape around her began to shift once more. The burning city faded into nothingness, and the ruins of the ancient civilization began to crumble away, revealing a new path forward, a path that led deeper into the heart of the Cradle. Elara's resolve strengthened as she stepped forward, the weight of the past still heavy on her shoulders, but no longer an anchor to hold her back. The Cradle had shown her what she needed to see. Now it was time to move forward and claim humanity's future. Elara stepped forward through the shifting ruins, her steps echoing in the silence as the Cradle pulsed with a rhythmic hum. The air around her was thick with energy. The very ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble with power. She could feel the weight of everything that had come before her, the decisions, the sacrifices, but she couldn't linger in the past any longer. The future of humanity was at stake, and she had no intention of letting it slip away. The landscape around her morphed once again, this time revealing a towering structure in the distance, its jagged peaks cutting into the crimson sky. It was a fortress, an ancient citadel built by the architects, and it was from here that the Cradle's power had originated. Elara could sense its significance, the energy in the air growing even more intense as she approached. As she neared the citadel, the voice spoke once more, its tone now almost mournful. "You have come far, Elara, but do you understand what you are about to unleash?" The voice asked, its words heavy with caution. Elara didn't stop. She kept moving, her eyes fixed on the structure ahead. "I understand more than you think," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "The Xylorians are coming. They will destroy everything and everyone if we don't stop them, and the Cradle is the only way to do that." The voice fell silent for a moment, and Elara's heart raced with anticipation. She was so close, she could feel it. The Cradle's power was within reach, and humanity's fate was tied to it. Then the ground rumbled again. The citadel's massive doors creaked open, revealing a darkened chamber within its depths. The walls were lined with glowing symbols that seemed to pulse in time with Elara's heartbeat. At the center of the chamber stood an altar, and upon it rested a crystalline object, its surface shimmering with an ethereal light. Elara could feel its presence like a beacon calling to her, urging her to take it, but she knew the consequences of such an act. "The Cradle's power is not without cost," the voice warned, its tone now filled with a sense of finality. "If you awaken it, you will unleash a force beyond your control, and the consequences could be catastrophic." Elara paused, her heart pounding as the weight of the decision pressed down on her. She had come so far, but was she truly ready to take on the burden of the Cradle's power? What if it was too much for humanity to handle? What if it consumed them all? But as she stood there staring at the crystal, a vision of her team flashed before her faces, of the men and women who had trusted her and followed her into this unknown battle, the faces of those who had given everything for a chance at survival. She couldn't fail them now. She couldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. Ilara reached out her hand, her fingers brushing the surface of the crystal, and as she made contact, the chamber seemed to come alive. The energy in the air crackled with power, and a blinding light engulfed her. She felt herself being pulled into the core of the cradle, her body weightless, as the force of its power surged through her mind and soul. For a brief moment she was lost in the void, her consciousness stretched thin as the cradle's ancient energies flowed through her. But then a vision appeared before her. It was the face of the Silurian leader, the one who had led the invasion. And in that moment she understood the truth. The cradle's power was not just a weapon, it was a test, and humanity was its final judge. The vision of the Silurian leader loomed before her, its cold, calculating eyes staring into her soul. The being's features were sharp and alien, but there was something familiar in its gaze, something that made Ilara's heart race. The Silurian's presence felt overwhelming, as if it were pushing her to her limits. The creature's voice echoed in her mind, low and guttural. "You think you can control the cradle's power? You think you can stop us?" Ilara's pulse quickened, but she refused to let fear take hold. "I can, and I will," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. The cradle had shown her the truth. Humanity's last chance at survival was bound to this power, but to wield it would require more than just strength. It would require sacrifice. The Silurian leader's lips curled into a smirk. "You are naive, Ilara," it said. "The cradle is not just a weapon. It is the essence of creation and destruction, and those who seek to control it will find themselves consumed by it." The word sent a chill through her as the cradle's energy surged once more, a wave of raw power that pushed her to the edge of her endurance. But Ilara stood her ground. She had seen destruction firsthand. She had witnessed the Silurians burn entire civilizations to ash, and she would not let that fate befall Earth and humanity. "I understand the risks," Ilara replied, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "But I won't let you destroy everything we've built. I won't let you wipe us out." The Silurian leader's eyes narrowed. "You are a fool to think you can stand against us," it hissed. "You are nothing compared to the power we possess." With that, the vision began to fade as the cradle's energy intensified. Ilara felt herself being pulled back into the depths of the chamber, the light around her flickering. As she fought to keep her mind intact, she was no longer just facing the cradle's power. She was facing the very essence of the Silurian threat, and she knew that this confrontation would decide the fate of Earth. As Ilara's mind cleared, she found herself back in the chamber, standing before the crystal. Once more the air around her was charged with a palpable energy, and the cradle's power was now fully awakened. She could feel the ancient force coursing through her veins, the weight of it almost unbearable, but she knew what had to be done. The room seemed to hum with anticipation as the cradle's energy built to a crescendo, and the crystal in front of her began to crack, its surface splitting as if it were alive, the power within it threatening to spill over. And Ilara realized that this was the moment when she would either embrace the cradle's power and wield it for humanity's survival or be consumed by it. Her hand hovered over the crystal, and for a moment she hesitated, doubt creeping into her mind. But then she thought of her team, her crew, her friends, and all those who had fought beside her for this moment. She couldn't back down now. With a final breath, Ilara pressed her hand against the crystal, and in that instant a surge of energy erupted through her body, the power of the cradle flooding her senses as visions of the future and past collided in a kaleidoscope of images. She saw humanity's past, struggles, their rise and fall, and their ultimate potential. She saw the Silurians and their merciless conquest across the stars. But most importantly, she saw the choice before her, a choice that would shape the future forever. Ilara's mind was awash with a torrent of visions, the future and past merging into a single overwhelming truth. The Cradle's power was more than she could have ever imagined. It was not just a weapon, but a force capable of reshaping the very fabric of existence. Her hand pressed firmly against the cracked crystal as energy surged through her body, every fiber of her being vibrating with the intensity of it. She could feel the weight of the choice before her. The future of humanity rested in her hands, but it was not a simple decision. It was a decision that would come at an unimaginable cost. The Cradle offered her the power to strike back against the Tylorians, to defeat them once and for all. But it would require more than just a weapon. It would require a sacrifice that could tear apart everything she had fought to protect. Her mind drifted to her team, their faces flickering in the depths of her thoughts, their lives tied to this moment, and their trust in her unwavering. She could not fail them now. But she also knew the Cradle's power could not be used recklessly. If she unleashed it without full understanding, she could doom them all. The Tylorian leader's voice echoed in her mind, once more cold and filled with contempt. "You still think you can win," it said. "You are nothing compared to the forces you're playing with. The Cradle is beyond your comprehension, and will consume you all in the end." Ilara gritted her teeth, refusing to let the voice sway her. This was her moment to define humanity's future, and she would not let it be stolen away by fear or doubt. She knew what she had to do. With a surge of willpower, Ilara focused her mind on the crystal and forced her thoughts to sharpen. She saw the path ahead of her, the consequences of every choice. The Cradle could give them the power to strike back, but only if she could control it, only if she could harness its energy without losing herself in the process. The chamber began to pulse as if the Cradle was reacting to her thoughts, and Ilara understood she was no longer just interacting with the Cradle. She had become part of it. The energy flowed through her veins like fire. She could feel the power of the architects, the beings who had created this weapon so long ago. They had designed it to be a tool for humanity's survival, but now it was hers to wield. The force of the Cradle's power surged again, this time more intense than before, and Ilara knew this was the moment when the future would be decided. She could feel the weight of the Tylorian threat bearing down on Earth, and the cost of victory was clear, but she wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and now she had the strength to make the final choice. In that instant, Ilara focused her mind on the Tylorians, the invaders who had ravaged her world. She saw them clearly, their ruthlessness, their unwavering pursuit of destruction, and in that moment she understood what had to be done. The Cradle could give them victory, but it would take more than just power. It would take strategy. It would take the very essence of humanity's will to survive. With a final breath, Ilara made her decision. She unleashed the full force of the Cradle. The power of the architects surged through her as she directed it toward the Tylorians. But this time, she didn't let the power consume her. She shaped it like a weapon of light and hope. And in that moment, the Cradle's wrath was unleashed across the stars. The Tylorians faltered, their forces crumbling under the weight of the attack. Their fleets shattered as the very fabric of their empire began to unravel, and as Ilara stood at the center of it, all she knew: humanity had survived. They had won, but it had come at a price. The Cradle's power had shaped their future, but it had also changed her forever. She stood there breathing heavily as the chamber began to settle, the energy around her slowly dissipating. The war was over. The Tylorians were defeated, but at what cost? Ilara looked down at her hands. They were still trembling from the power she had just unleashed, and she wondered if she had truly made the right choice. But one thing was clear: humanity had a future, and that was enough.